I'm going to introduce this next panel, which is on design and production, and the idea of how design and the manufacture of design have relations and how they affect each other. And Jeff Chu, who is editor at Fast Company, he's going to moderate the discussion. And I asked Jeff to do this, to moderate this discussion, because I came across his writings a couple of years ago. He had written a story about, it was about design within reach and the retailer. And it was a kind of scathing but very deep dive into the culture of that company. And it was the kind of journalism that you don't often find in design. And I think recently, with schools like with the Decrit program at SVA in New York, there's more of a culture emerging around design criticism, and I thought that Jeff's article was a really powerful example of how design criticism, design journalism could shape the discourse. And at Fast Company, Jeff is really looking at this boundary of business and design, and so I'm going to hand it over. Actually, you have your
Thank you. So we do not have presentations for this session. The conversation is our presentation. So we want to keep it going relatively briskly. I'm also going to keep the introductions very short because students and faculty, I trust, have good reading comprehension skills, and all the bios are in the book. So I have Ville Kokkonen from Artec, Benjamin Pardo from Knoll, and Paul Johnson from Johnson Trading Gallery. We want to talk about reality, the reality of design, the messy reality of design and making things. This is, as Kara noted, National Design Week. And Fast Company celebrated that on Tuesday night with our Innovation by Design Awards. And Margaret Stewart, who is the director of product design at Facebook, she said something really interesting in her presentation there. She said, making things is an essential part of being human. And that made me think a lot about what I'm making and what we all individually make. In some ways, we're all storytellers, but what medium do we use to tell our stories? And what are the stories that we're telling? I wanted to share one other quote with you in introduction, and that was a quote that something Tom Brown said in his acceptance speech at the National Design Awards on Wednesday night. The Cooper Hewitt had a fantastic party, and Tom Brown was honored as the fashion designer for this year's National Design Awards. He said something I found very provocative. He described his work as true design. He said, I design first, and then I think about the commercial element later. And I thought this was very interesting, very divisive, I would say. You know, I don't think everybody has the luxury of creating something first and designing later. And I wanted to start off our conversation by asking you all what you think of that argument, that true design is something that is commercialized after it's been designed. I'd especially like to start with Artec and Knoll to see if that's a viable model for making things.
You could step in that one first.
Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you very much to the organizers, especially Di Mustafavi, Jonathan, and Chantal for organizing. It's been great, and all the panelists as well. That's actually a very important point that I think we touched upon the discussions here earlier on. I believe there's a bit of truth to that, in a sense that there are still projects where you need to discover several things, several issues, and the discovery or the problem solving has to come before the commercial aspect. But at the same time, you know, you have to be able to commercialize objects. I'm speaking partly from the designer's shoes and also representing a company. There's truth in both ways. I could add to that what we talked about, or what was discussed in the first panel discussion about how young designers actually, after graduation, what do they do? How do they start their practices, and how do they get their first jobs? I have to correct a little bit. There's actually several companies that don't just pay royalties. There's actually a design fee that is paid to designers. And there's also a sort of pre-royalty procedure where you get paid for the objects that will be sold in the future. And that sort of covers the designers back that they can actually design and focus on that project. Usually the projects are from 3 to 4 years. And having said that, I mean in this sense that yeah, there's way too many designers, and big part of being a design director in a company is to go through proposals that are being sent to us of ready-made designs, and these are tables, lighting fixtures, and chairs that designers have been designed in a vacuum by themselves for a client X, and they send these to companies and ask, can you produce this, or are you interested in this? And that's actually today's dilemma, is that how is it that, or what do universities teach to designers that there is this situation? A lot of companies, these proposals come from all over the world, so it's not just a European problem or North American or Asian or South American. But we'll continue on this.
I don't know. The quotation to me, I could say I think it's crap, but I think that that's a little strong. Ultimately, it's okay for a commercially viable product to be good. And in fact, I would also go so far as to say that one of the measures of success of a product is the fact that it's good and you sell it. And I would go even so far, but then again, I come from the background that I come from, to almost sort of define design-based objects as things that are part of a production, meaning that 3 or 4 of something is craft, and intellectual idea is art, and production is design. So, you know, an intellectual idea is great, and I deal with those every day, and they're the basis of what it is that we do, where we've been, where we go. But at the same time, a product needs to be successful. And I have bread and butter products, I have products that sell other products, I have all those things. But I can't buy into that. I can't buy into that in any real sense.
Paul, I'm curious for your point of view on this, because you definitely straddle the line between very small numbers and slightly larger production runs. So I don't know where your products would fit in to Benjamin's classifications.
I think that most of the things I produce are not commercially viable, unfortunately. But when I approach a designer and they have a chance to produce something with me that companies wouldn't do, that's where I kind of get excited about somebody, where they want to make something that we don't think about, can we sell it or how we're going to sell it. We just think about kind of their soul and what they want to do for design. So like a young designer, like Max Lamb, came to me and said, I want to make a bronze chair from styrofoam. And I said, okay, can I see a model? He says, well, I can't make a model because I don't have the money. And I said, okay, here's the money, let's make it. We didn't know if there was any market for a bronze chair made from a styrofoam model, but we did it anyways. So when Tom Brown's saying he's a true designer, I mean, I would be thankful or appreciative to find more people that feel like that, where they feel like they can do something that's really close to them. And I only produce a very small number of works, so it makes sense for me to approach it that way. And then we found out that when we do it that way, you get this unique thing, and it makes it commercially viable as this piece of art or this piece of design where people can't figure out where it goes, but they like it. And I always like to sell things that people love. So when they see a bronze chair made of styrofoam, they don't really need it, but they like it, and they can see this whole kind of designer's soul and this me and the designer who took a chance on something that, you know, it's not, we didn't make it thinking we were going to get rich or we were going to sell 20,000 of them. You know, we're happy if we sell one.
I'm curious from the Knoll and Artec point of view, whether you're more on the side of making things that you want people to love primarily, or things that you want people to need, which is a difference.
Depends on which part of our business, right? So we are a large company with a bunch of different divisions. We make office furniture, systems, seating. We make individual objects, classics, and products that have come after classics, which fall in the studio range. We make textiles. We have 2 leather companies. So the real question is that there are things in all of those areas that start to define that. You need a desk, right? You need a chair. Maybe you need a desk and a chair. I think that that's the question that the people in the office furniture industry are really asking. Do you really need a desk, and do you really need a chair, and can you work with the thing that's in your pocket? So need and the desire question, or coveting an object, are again, how do you bring those 2 things together? We were talking earlier about the question of overall architecture, and then how does design fit into that? And then some people talked about architecture there was a question of scale. Everything relates to people. I mean, buildings relate to people, chairs relate to people. An overall interior architecture relates to people. So the question that I think is very important when you go through this, I'm a guy that works with objects that create a sub-architecture, so to speak. And the question is one that I don't think about the individual thing. My goal is really to start to think about the overall environment, and what are we creating for people in terms of their work and or residential environments, and what is it that makes them feel comfortable and at home and productive. So there are issues there that are about desire. There was some conversations about how is an object animated. I think it was about the Bellini skin, right? So I worry about how you touch the top and the bottom of a work surface. Those things are very important. You spend a lot of time touching those things all day. So an object that you need becomes an object that you like to touch. There's a sensual level associated with it. So we have to balance those things in both things that we do. I can't really separate one from the other.
Yeah, I agree with Ben in many ways. You can't separate the two options, but there's sometimes we brief when we see that there's a gap in our portfolio. We want to be able to provide furniture, lighting, sofas, screens, door handles, and so forth for our clients, and to keep up what the company was established for. And sometimes there are objects that fill the sort of the product families, and those necessarily aren't objects that we need, but they're functional, and they have a purpose. But there's this constant battle of even inside the company that you have to fight for products that we should keep in production, and quite often there's this the sales staff and the logistics and the warehouse people. They would like to kill 20 products, for example, because they don't sell well. If they sell only like 40 pieces per year, the cost and the effort to maintain them and ship them all over the world, in their sort of accurate minds, they think it's nonsense. But those objects are needed in order to fulfill a larger sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, which was the foundation of how Artek was laid out for, or the Artek's product portfolio is mainly based on Alvarado's designs, which come from starting from 1930s, which is actually almost the same year when GSE was founded, which is quite a nice good age. And so majority of those products are still in production, and we just have to keep them because we love them, but at the same time they represent the company. But could be that 60% of them are not sales hits. They don't bring so much turnover.
I'm interested in this idea of the product family and the portfolio, especially given the histories that Noel and Artek have versus an operation like Johnson Trading Gallery, which does one-offs, doesn't have the same constraints. I was wondering if you all could talk a little bit about the opportunities as well as the challenges of your respective business models, having that legacy versus not, having that history and expectation versus not. How does that affect what you make, what you create?
Well, there's an element of my business that I started in 1999 that just did vintage. And I would scour around looking for Knoll or looking for Artec. So I have this kind of relationship of my gallery where it's really important for me sorry, to show historical design alongside of contemporary design. It's always been a big part of my business. I basically trained myself through vintage, and then after 5 years felt comfortable enough to go into the contemporary side. And I think that the advantages of being small like me is that I can work one-on-one with like a young designer and really get involved in working in the production of what they want to do in building an exhibition or building a small show. Or we can't go into it thinking we're going to make 50 products, but we can go into it thinking, okay, here's a small body of work that we can produce for an exhibition that has a statement, that has quality, and has everything that either it's an architect or a designer. I've worked with lots of architects as well when they decide that they want to do furniture. But the disadvantage of being a small gallery like that is we don't have as much resources, or we don't have access to production capabilities that these big corporations have. So we have to find ways around it. And that goes into using unique materials or new technologies, or any way we can get an advantage to get our product made, with the kind of minimal budget that we have. And at the same time, we have to produce it and have it at a certain price level that makes it viable for us as a gallery to keep going, because the gallery system today in the design world is quite expensive. So you have to be able to keep up and sell things at this certain level where larger companies can produce log and make volume. They sell volume, or we sell small quantities of things. So I think the advantage is that I can move quicker with young designers and move around and do different types of projects faster. But at the same time, it's harder to get them all produced.
Part of your answer is actually, I want to step back to the previous two panels. I'll start with the one that immediately preceded us, which took a very curatorial approach to the conversation. And the first one was about a series of young designers. And then I'll sort of add one that doesn't exist, and that's really a historic basis, which is a lot what this institution is about. It's the study of what the hell has gone on before, where we are now, and where we're going. So the real question is when I combine those things, I think about the legacy associated with Knoll products. And then I think about the value that that has, notwithstanding the sales volume of an individual item, and the influence that that has on all the things that I currently do and what it is that I do. But ultimately, it comes back to something very specific that you said. Yeah, we're big. We're a billion-dollar publicly held company. But the relationships that I hold with designers and the relationships that I hold with designers that are dead are extremely intimate. So, based on the conversation, I worked with Jonathan. There were 4 years that went into making an aluminum chair. There's a huge relationship between that back lip of his chair that you saw and the Saarinen tulip chair. So there's a touch point. There's the understanding of how does light react to that in the same way? How do you pull all of those things through? How did I, in some ways, think about, if I'm using a different manufacturing process, how do I weave the designer or the guy that I'm working with now that I'm making an investment in the future? So the person is really the basis of what our past and our legacy is all about. And I think that there's an incredible intimacy to a large extent on the part of the guy in this role and here, even on scale in terms of the way in which we work with people, because it's about people and solving problems. And it's about solving those problems in the context of the history of manufacturing. Furniture is nothing more than the history of materiality to a certain extent. And how do we pull all of those questions through? So it's very valuable to balance both of the parts of your question in terms of what your legacy is, preserve that, but use that to propel you forward. I think the last statement that I'll make is that we were talking about space and relationships, and Nelson came up. And I say this every time that I speak because it's the quintessential, it's the core of what it is that we represent. There are two guys, Eames Saarinen, and there's a lady by the name of Florence Knoll. 1940 exhibition, Museum of Modern Art, they did a chair, molded plywood. Then there's this post-war boom associated with materiality, the capability to do different kinds of things. Eames makes celebratory objects. It's product design. It's what represents Herman Miller. Okay? You see a Herman Miller product. We talked about George. We talk about Eames. You come into the room and you see it. It's got purple things on it. It's a bright color. It's a wonderful form. You see a Florence Knoll interior and the work that she did with her Cranbrook crony Saarinen. She made boxes, okay? She was the lady that was about creating an interior architecture in an architecture. And I will be so bold as to make that statement. Circulatory space. But what she did with her work with Saarinen is that she then took the figure, okay? That form that's the piece that sits in the foreground that talks to the architecture. So basically the game that they're playing is that they are the big space and me, the figurative thing. So it's me in a room, it's me in a building, it's me in all of those things. So that all has to be tied together in everything that it is that we do. And that's legacy, future, investment in young people, new thinking, what they're doing, and tying it to what we've always done.
Well said. Well, Artek is a lot smaller company. Actually, was struggling, let's say, 10 years ago, almost forgotten. The brand is really well known, and the piece is designed by Alvar Aino Aalto, are in the majority of the museums, and hopefully a lot of design students go through them and they notice them, maybe because of the link with inventions in wood technology and the lightweight color of birch masswood and birch plywood. I think partly the company's heritage is the fact that Finland was an extremely poor country in the 1930s, actually one of the poorest countries in Europe, and there wasn't a possibility to buy interior objects, so everything had to be made there. There's a huge tradition in this mentality to survive, and at that time, almost every man and women, they knew how to build houses, so they built their summer houses and so on. And there was really this sort of history is really important, and so part of Artek's heritage was that these there's actually 4 people who founded the company in 1935. One was Mayra Gulliksen, who was an artist, an art collector, studied in Paris. There was Niels Gustav Hall, who was culturally extremely interesting person. He was also curating. He started a film club. He was interested in politics, global issues, and so on. And he introduced Mayra Gulliksen to the Aalto couple, and they started the company. And the idea was to sell Alvar Aalto's furniture. He was more actually first known as a designer of furniture pieces than as an architect. And then that evolved. They started always designing spaces first, and then all the objects inside the space. The lighting fixtures, the door handles, the screens, the sofas, and so on. And that became the whole body or the portfolio of the company. And when I joined Artek 7 years ago, with the current CEO, Mirko Kuhlberg, we looked actually at the founding manifesto, and their sort of idea was written in a sheet of paper in a restaurant in Helsinki, and they wanted to start a company, and they called it a propaganda center for new housing ideology. And they didn't want to start a company that sells furniture or lighting fixtures. They wanted to create an institution that cultivates and educates Finnish people who couldn't afford to travel. So they started a showroom in the city in Helsinki, and also a gallery. So there was an Artek gallery functioning since 1940s, actually died down in 1980. And the idea was stronger than just to sell goods and make money. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the company has been so small, even until today. So we tried to maintain that heritage. We tried to maintain the thinking behind what the founders had, and which is very active till today. And so we took initiative to go a bit back to that. Not to forget that we briefed alive designers to design objects as well, and so on. But we also thought that it's really important for the people in the company and for our clients to be active in the art world. So we got involved with different projects which were either we were asked to join a project to work with an artist, or we approached an artist and we made either spatial installations or small series objects and so on. I think this was a quite successful decision, since that was more important for the company to survive than to try to just look at the numbers and try to figure out what's the next best-selling stool, for example.
So that's the art side of it. I know when we were talking, Ville, before the panel, we also talked about the science side of it and the R&D part of the production process, which has also been very important, to borrow Benjamin's phrase, for propelling the company into the future. Can you talk a little bit about how the changing technology and the opportunities have been built into what you do now?
Yes, well, we tend to not just stick to use birch veneer or mass birch wood. We also have a furniture collection designed by Ilmari Tapiavaara, which is steel, and we have also works by Tapio Virkala. He used lots of precious metals. We also have a small objects collection. But we look into constantly different ways to collaborate with material experts and factories that are in Finland and abroad. And as an example, we've been working quite closely with the plywood manufacturing, and through that we've been working with paper companies, and we did a project with Shikaru Ban a few years ago where we used recycled paper and plastic to create a piece of furniture that you can use outdoors. But we also go back to the options of using or more deeper into birch veneer, and what are the possibilities of actually in that, and there's huge discoveries in birch with the fact that it's antibacterial, and you can make nowadays out of the birch pulp nanocellulose fibers, and I think the future is really interesting. And since we are here at GSD, one of the problems of the education is that there's no way one could cover in the university a particular subject. So you really actually start studying when you graduate, and I really believe that nowadays, since there's so many different materials, so many numerous different objects that you could specialize in, one really should consider the options of where one should or could specialize. As an example, Jonathan mentioned earlier that he worked 4 years on a chair or on a pen. That is actually when you become professional, when you really dig into one particular problem or a product or a material or a production method.
Ben, do you agree with that?
Yeah, but I think I look at it depends on the object that I'm working on and the specificity, and I work at it in two ways as a generalist. So in the past 6 months, I've been to a steam wood bender in the middle of Ohio. When I got there, they were Amish, and there were no cars. It was all horse and buggies. And I went in, and the electricity came from generators, and he had a very large, great business, but it was about this idea of craft in a sense that had to do with a time in the past. To sitting in a room with really geeky engineers talking about plastic, or working with a color expert at Clariant, who's someone that we work very closely with DuPont, who I love because he took too much LSD in the 70s, and having that conversation. So I think that material question also comes down to the people that you get to work with. I spend time in terms of also not on the materiality, but how do you make stuff? So I recently spent time in a plant that was dealing with CNC sewing, and just am recovering from sewing my 2 fingers right here together by the machine that you're not supposed to touch. So I think that we look at it in terms of general questions, in terms of what's going on in terms of materiality, what are the renewables that are out there, what are our obligations in terms of changing certain things in the products that we currently have, to a level of specificity. Specificity deals with the projects that I got on the books right now. So at the moment, we're dealing with a lot of transparency with REM in some products that we're doing, and I can tell you everything about any kind of transparent polymer that you really want to know and that I don't want to know any more about. And I know an enormous amount about adhesives at this point to keep those things together. Frank Gehry's chair exists because of 3M. And we were an early guinea pig, so to speak, of glue. And I think that when I first owned those houses, I had them out at a house in the country, and I came back the first weekend and the chairs were all over the dining room. So I think that there were issues associated with Knoll there. So I think that materiality is also a question of being a pioneer and pushing the envelope and understanding who's working on what and pushing them. At the same time, I think that I have certain goals. I want to be able to use something that involves the lost wax process and cast iron, because everybody freaks out because it's too damn expensive and we can't go through things like that. But that's a really important thing. I have this Paolo Piva bed that has these cast iron feet. And every night when I stub my toe on it, I praise the things associated with this wonderful material that we don't use, that has weight and can bear things down, and this wonderful finish associated with it. And it comes back to that sensuality. So it's that balance. It's that exciting thing, and it comes down to the people that I meet in Ohio or in Milan or somewhere out in the middle of Austria to look at a sewing technique and a weaving technique associated with something, and then bringing that back. And then the most exciting part of that is when you get to put that in the hands of a designer, because you've done all of this research, and then you give them the opportunity to set up a whole new set of criteria associated with how can that person that knows their craft really well go the next step. And that's my job, to edit, because I'm not a designer, and to figure out when is it viable in terms of pushing someone to get to that next point, to get exactly what the designer wants, understanding price, when do I need to launch, how much do all of those things come together, packing, all of those things come together. It's an orchestration and an editing of how to bring that stuff together. And that's one of the most treasured parts of what it is that I do.
Sorry. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned lost wax, because I've worked with the designer Max Lamb, and
I'm totally jealous.
so we got to do we played with lost wax, and we came up with a new method where we would make a chair or a table or a bowl or a fruit bowl, anything, and we would make it out of wax, and you couldn't use it beforehand. But instead of using a traditional lost wax, we thought we would electroplate it and grow the copper on it and then drain out the rest. So we found a manufacturer who makes Rolls-Royce grills, and they allowed us to come there and try it, and they had the tanks that gave us the ability to do that.
So it's charged. You have a positive.
Yeah, it's a positive negative charge. We put it in the tank. It actually grows the copper on it. When it cools down, we drain it out and we fill the hole. So to me, I have no idea about any of this. You know, I'm not a designer just like you. I'm a dealer. I'm a buyer and a seller. But a young designer found a way around finding this expensive way to produce it. So we did it, and it worked. But at the same time, that same artist has brought me to AB Fine Art Foundry, which is in London, to make his bronze work. They make all Antoine Gormley sculptures. They make all Mark Quinn sculptures. It's one of the most amazing 100-year-old foundries I've ever been into in my life. And that's the fun part of our job, when we get to work with a designer and go around to these places all around the world. I work with a Korean designer who took me to this traditional area in Korea about 6 months ago. You wouldn't believe it. They're casting bronze in the ground in a shed about the size of this table, smoking cigarettes. It's insane. And these shacks. He's like, oh yeah, that one burned down last week. I was like, oh my God. But you get to see like the historic side of it. And then I work with someone like Aranda Lash, who has me in a place looking at robotic arms and CNC machines and all these things. So that's the part of my job that I love when a designer tells me, I want to make it, but I don't know how to do it, but I think I could figure it out. And then that's when we go and we start to divulge and go through all this process. But in the end, we made something that's never been made before. And that's what that my gallery or me, and that's what we strive to do.
Products have backstories, and I think that they don't always get told. So it's sort of like when you stay at the movies in LA, everyone watches and everyone really sits there and you go through the whole thing. But they're exciting stories. I mean, I think that it's not only the designer that has the personality. There was a conversation earlier in one of the groups that talked about the Italian model. I think it was in the first one that talked about architects doing all different kinds of things. Well, at a certain point, that's a real question associated with practicality. And I think that it came up in the second talk. People need to earn a living. You can't build a lot of buildings in Italy because there's not a lot of space to build it. So what the hell are you going to do? And I think that the design phase or the design area that really a lot of the work was done, particularly in the furniture industry, is in the north. And it's an area outside of Milan called Brianza. And there's three things there that are magical that make the whole thing work. There are a lot of architects who can't build buildings, right? Historically and now, currently. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are very interested in building objects. And there are a lot of people in Italian called terziste, or people who have a very specific specialization. So they make helicopter blades and chairs, who have this wonderful capability. It takes all three of those people to make an object. It doesn't happen with just this. The idea is momentary. The execution is hard work, okay? The conceptualization of the object, it doesn't stop there. It really doesn't. It begins there. And I think that especially with a group of people who are entering into a phase of their life when they're working through that, understand the joy associated with figuring out those problems and working with those people to help you do that. I think that in order to sort things out, who does what and how do you do that work, there's a real question associated with excellence. So I think that excellence is defined by all the crap that ain't excellence, right? So that's also true associated with the fact that not everybody's a great designer, but there are a lot of people that need to help orchestrate that and make something work. And granted, it's that signature on there, and they're the ones that are accredited, but it's a huge orchestration, and it's absolutely delightful.
So we're going to open it up for questions in a moment. Before we do, I just want to ask you to answer one question really briefly, a very practical question that stems from this. What advice do you give to people who are preparing to enter this world that you've just described and deal with the reality of it? How do you want to see them educated?
Spelling. I'm serious. I mean, I get a letter, I see a product, and spelling is basically from here to the trash bin. I'm extremely serious. I mean, if you can't spell, I ain't working with you.
Well, for my part, maybe it would be what was discussed earlier today, that architecture is really difficult to showcase in museums, so travel.
I think for a young designer, the best thing to do is to kind of choose a path and then go that way.
To specialize.
Yeah, just you have your own feelings and your own, something that makes you feel that you can go to sleep at night, that you do every day. Just go and do that.
So I've been asked to take 4 questions, and then we'll kind of answer them as a set. We've got one back there. I'll be the scribe.
So I guess in the last panel, Kara mentioned this issue of designing for the other 90%. Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Now I can.
So, okay, great. Kara mentioned this issue of designing for the other 90%. And I guess I'm curious, as you think about this from the business side and the design side, how do you balance maintaining profit margins, shareholder value, with also getting better design out to more people in the world?
Other questions? Murray?
it's interesting because it seems to me that the three of you are not terribly interested in each other's businesses.
No, I don't think that that's
No,
true.
no. I'm just giving my personal take. And what dawns on me is you're all in the same business. You're just at different points of it, and it seems so wasteful because if you worked in tandem like the fashion industry does, Paul, I mean, you have a tremendous impact on the market, your company, as does yours, but so does Paul's. I mean, Paul has a tipping point. He has incredible, without the $1 billion, he's affecting the way the world is going and through the venues that he's choosing to show it. And I wonder what would happen in the industry if you maintained your separate businesses, but all of us were seen as sort of in collaboration.
Yes, anyone on the panel had experience with intellectual property law or patent law?
As conceptual design is merging today with production processes, future design won't defined stages like image making, etc., in production. So we can predict that production will be the object of design. Would you accept the term design production or the designing of production as a design task?
So let's tackle the commercial questions first. It seems to be a little family of questions there. Balancing the commercial and the non-commercial. Intellectual property definitely plays into that, and how you consider the impact of intellectual property theft, that sort of thing. And then the power of collaboration. Go.
The first one, we deal with it every single day. Any object that we start on, we have a squadron of people who start to go out and understand design patent, what previous patents took place, and it affects designs. So I could talk about a specific chair that we worked on called the Generation Chair. The IP from the Herman Miller Aeron chair kept me from doing the arm that I wanted to do it. The way in which a previous chair that was done by Don Chadwick could not have mesh encapsulated in such and such a way that ultimately, justifiably, put me at a competitive disadvantage associated with additional cost. So it is a minefield, and I think that it's a methodology by which the process takes place. And I have to say that I think that people should be compensated for what it is that they invent. In terms of patenting, I start to get a little bit queasy when people are patenting nature associated with DNA sequencing and so on and so forth, but that's not my personal problem. It's an intellectual one. But it's a part of everyday practice for us in terms of having to do those searches. And then I think to Murray's question, I think that yes, there's always a commercial separation between companies on a competitive level. But I think that I take an attitude which may or may not be different than my peers, and that is that the success of these companies and any other company that fits in that area is absolutely urgent to me, because their success can only reflect upon the success of Knoll in general. And I think that call it a mafia or call it whatever it is that you want, I think the fact that and I can speak again personally, that there's always an enormous amount of outreach on my part to the people that do what I do and other commercials in our industry and related industries to see what's going on and to find out what people are doing and understand the ideas behind what they're talking about is starting to touch on what you're discussing. Because I think that there's a way in which one puts together a corporate strategy in terms of what your products are, in terms of the Herman Miller and Knoll example that I gave earlier, and then associated with the relationship to art tech, and then also a relationship back to these one-off objects. They're vital to what it is that my understanding is in the relationship to how I think,
where things are going. So to me, these things are extremely related, and I try to keep those contexts as open as possible. It's the only way in which I think that I can make what it is that I do in the company that I work for successful. And I'm doing that now, and the moment I stop doing that, I won't be doing it anymore. So I think that it's vital for me to keep those lines of communication open.
Regarding one of the questions, when you work inside a small company, and even if you would have the greatest of ideas to how to work towards the rest of the 90%, sometimes you just cannot do it because of just pure logistics and so forth. We did have one particular study that we thought that we could maybe go towards that by lifting up a project that we thought within our industry was extremely good example of this direction, and that was a project that Enzo Mari designed in 1973 called Autoprogettazione, where he designed a set of dimensions that one could build a table, a chair, and so forth. I think there's altogether 14 different pieces, and this was never manufactured by a particular company, but he sent that booklet to anybody who sent him a stamp or the amount of money that took. And we when Artek turned 75, we wanted to focus on education, and we made a poster. We worked together with Enzo, who is still alive and active in Milan, keeping his studio, and we made yes, very true. We made a short film that we asked him to explain the project, and we made a poster, and we wanted to sell the poster or give the poster for free, that anyone who has the option to go to a lumber yard could build this chair. So one could have a chair that's well designed, is strong enough, and is functional. And then we realized that maybe everybody doesn't have the chance to go to the lumber yard. So we also made an alternative side project where we have the lumber cutting pieces and 50 nails, and we expected that people have a hammer at home. And so they would have the directions, they would download the film or use the poster to create the chair. Then as an example, we also gave the option that someone could buy the chair assembled. And we realized that what we had and who our clients were, and how I guess Artek is sound from outside, no one wanted to buy the poster. And not so many people want to buy the package that contains all that you need, but they bought the ready-made chair. So they bought the already assembled and hammered down, which we also tried to be transparent by explaining how much it costs to actually buy the lumber, how much it costs to cut and saw that, and how much it costs to have the nails there. And still people didn't want to do it themselves. And maybe that tells something about our society, or maybe we learned a lot about who our clients were or who we are talking with.
I guess the patent question, I really have no idea. But the commercial viability, I might not have any other idea about that either. But in terms of producing things for the other 90%, in my world, I mostly deal with the art world and art collectors. So I've always tried to find a way to sell things to my friends who are my age and can't really afford what I do. I've never sold anything to any of my friends, but I've tried. And so last year, when I did Design Miami, I came up with an idea that I would ask 4 designers to produce a box all around like $750,000, $1,000, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to sell thousands of these. I sold 0. But I did sell a Nakashima table for $75,000. So it depends what market you're going after. You know, you have to pick your market and then tailor your products to it, or you just have to know your audience. I mean, you can't force people that don't have the money to try to get involved in this world. You know, it's just not viable for them. They can be fans of it and they can be a part of it, and I want them to come to every single opening, or they come to my gallery every day, and I'll talk to them for hours if they want to. But they might not be able to buy it, and that's just part of my business that I accept. You know, because I produce. I mean, and then to Murray's question, if there was a collaboration with Noel or Artek, maybe I can take my designers and get them to a point where they can produce something where, you know, everyday people could do it. So that's kind of what I think about that.
Down to the 90% question. The real question associated with that is, if we look at what that 90% is, a lot of the time that 90% doesn't need a chair or an office system. It needs to eat, and it also needs water that won't make their children die from diarrhea. So or any number of other disease-related questions. I think that the way in which we can make an impact on that as a large corporation is to have a sensitivity in terms of the way in which we approach the world, the donations that we make, the additional focus, our involvement with the Clinton Global Initiative, and how we deal with that as a corporate entity. I'm not trying to sell a chair to somebody who can't get purified water. But I think that there is a huge, huge responsibility on a corporate level to understand that the prosperity of the West is such that you have to give back to the rest of the world. And I think that we are very good corporate citizens. We pay attention to those things, and it's very much part of who we are and what the vision of our CEO, Andrew Kogan, is all about. And that's the important part to me. So,
on that kumbaya note, I'm going to bring this to a close, and I hope you've enjoyed this collaboration as much as I have. We have a roundtable coming up, so we will cede the floor to them.
I think we're going to sit down for a bit and let Mac run his video. Oh, good. And then we'll come to the point. So, is this work? Yeah. So, we are almost getting to the end. This one last session, the roundtable to go. Just to get us going, Max Goggin is going to start with a video. So, I'm going to ask the participants in the panel discussion to sit down for a bit. Let us look at the video, because otherwise we'll be looking at it over our shoulder. And on Wednesday night at the National Design Awards, Max Goggin with his partner Mary Lelam, they were the winners of the Architecture Award. And the awards were also handed to them by Karen Stein. So we're going to have both of them on the panel. But Mac is first going to start, and then we'll have everybody else come and join us here for the roundtable. Mac, where are you going?
Do I need to say something?
You can, yeah, sure. Okay. Give a context for the video.
Context for the video. Like 2 minutes ago, I realized I've been teaching here in this institution for almost 30 years, and no one has ever asked me to explain what I teach. No one has ever asked me to show what I teach. So, or my students' work. So this is the first for me, and it makes me really nervous, and especially since I've got all these experts around. Very quickly, Rolf Feldbaum asked me, after being introduced to him by Karen Stein, why don't we teach interior design in architecture schools? And I thought that was an interesting question, and I didn't have an answer. So I decided I'd try. How do you teach interior design in architecture school? I would even say, why would you? What's the difference between the two? I mean, how can you have something that's interior and then something that's exterior? Where's the architecture? The architecture, I guess, then is between the two. It's that thickness of the wall, I guess. I like that because you can't have the other two without. So we'll claim that. I don't have a position on this very much, but I have loved the last 2 semesters to try to balance between these realms and teach what I would, only thing I can teach, which is architecture. So I'm not going to explain the sort of entire pedagogy of these studios. It's kind of complicated in a way. But the basic, I think that you have to have a discourse to have a discipline. And that discourse is what sustains the discipline. And at the heart and soul of that discourse is the critique. And then at the heart and soul of the heart and soul is the individual. And that those individuals have to be empowered. They have to believe in their self to the extent that they create a real tension between their fantasies and someone else's reality. And so that's what I think these studios are trying to address, because I think if you take that position, it doesn't really matter what you call it. So this takes like 16 or 17 minutes. I thought that it was going to be on this big wall. Do we have sound? Okay. This is my able assistant, Doug.
Hay un olor extraño. O eso me parece. Dentro hay 2 camas, una cómoda, un arcón y una fantástica mecedora. También hay telarañas detrás de la cómoda. Al pisar, el suelo cruje y notas un pequeño temblor. Hay una puerta, una ventana, una lámpara. Me aburro tumbado, despierto, mirando fijamente el techo. A menudo me imagino andando allí, boca abajo. Esquivo la lámpara. Empujo cuidadosamente la puerta. Finalmente, soy libre.
Oh, when I was about 5 years old. Strolling through my Stellar Calhoun, Michael Lee Calhoun's home, they had a piano. They were the only people that had a piano in that part of the country. And I walked up to this piano and I picked out a tune and I played Silent Night on it. And my mother walked by and was listening, and she told my dad, she said, Elmo, he's going to be a natural born pianist. And Dad said, yeah, he might be a piano player. And so there's a difference in a pianist and a piano player. I don't know. We're still working on that one. I was picking guitar pretty good when I was, I don't know, 6, 7 years old. I could pick pretty good guitar. But the piano was fascinating to me. I knew that was the instrument that I wanted to play and get into, because it was the classy instrument. And it took a long time for people to get the piano put out in front on the stage. It was always somebody with a guitar in their hand, making a chord. As long as they could make a key of G or E and sang a little bit, they were a hit. But to prove yourself to be a hit on the piano was hard to do back in those days, in the 50s, to get started. You shake my nerves and you rattle my brain. Too much love to have a man insane. You broke my will, what a thrill. Goodness be raised with balls of fire.
William Stumpf first wrote me about the Aran simply as a design project. and only later as a philosophy. The Aeron was released in 1994. Though commonly understood as a chair, it was also the embodiment of a larger research project started 20 years earlier. Herman Miller, as an institution, embarked on a program of universal design. They believed the full spectrum of human action and emotion could be addressed, accommodated, and improved. Economics had come between the body and the physicality of its desires. The ultimate task of design was to reconnect these desires, though we did not know it at the time. He wrote me, "Design wasn't just business, it was a moral obligation. With the Metaform project, we were developing a design philosophy that would fit into every contour of human life, the coordination of every behavior, the smooth execution of all memories and feelings." Herman Miller's Aeron brief reads as a simple but ambitious statement for a new work chair. Comfort. Because people develop a mental set of what constitutes comfort, comfort is as much a matter of mind as it is of matter. The chair should be perceived as comfortable before, during, and after sitting on it. Task motivating. Recognizing that sitting is only a means to another end, the chair should provide security in the variety of positions that a worker assumes in task performance. Accommodating. Since the chair will have to serve more than one individual, it should be designed so that it can easily be adjusted to fit most body sizes. Health-giving. The chair should provide a structure that will reduce physiological stress and help maintain the health of the body. The chair should actively promote the health of the person who sits in it. It ought to move and adjust as simply and naturally as possible. It should support a person in any position, at any task. He wrote me, "We created a hoax with the Aeron chair. I was never after a chair at all. The true Aeron was too ambitious to market. We wanted to improve every human behavior with the Aeron central mechanism. It was a truly universal design. It was infinite variability." Within the language of the brief, you can still see some threads of its original purpose. Not just physical, but mental comfort and health. Any position, any task. He said, "In the end, we constrained the Aeron. With a series of appendages, it was reduced to a chair. Perhaps it was the right thing to do, though I don't know." Despite Williams' claims of the universal, Aeron was ironically dependent on its context. Each use only existed in relation to something else: the desk, the conference room, the telephone, the CRT. Within every mention of universality is the contradiction of the particular. The Aeron, in its desire to satisfy every task, was crippled by its complete dependency on sight. He wrote about his misgivings and about a spring he spent in Vienna studying with Felix Alpenfeld, the short letters he sent to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and a woman he met there. how she took a class on Northern Renaissance painting, and though she didn't plan on liking it, she was very taken. In the autumn of 2002, William sent me a clipping about the myth of Actaeon and a short note comparing hunting dogs with industrial design. He wrote, "Initially, design was one of our tools. It was a device for improving skills. But now we have used it to defile all innocence and have become the stags it once hunted. The human body is the object of design's pursuit."
I apologize to the students how grossly I've edited all of their work. Those projects represent, I don't know, thousands of hours over 3 months time, and they're much more complex. These are just little small snippets of the exercises. But I hope it gives you a kind of feel for at least an approach to teaching what I would just simply reduce to an issue of spatial design. Yeah, right. You know. I wanted to say one more thing. On the screen right here is a project that, I guess in about 1992 or something, I was walking up, the students will relate to this, walking by a review, and I just happened out of the corner of my eye see this project sitting on the floor. And I didn't see the student. I just looked at it, and I couldn't help but just burst into the thing and said, "Oh, what is that? That is fantastic." And then I looked up at the student, and I saw this little tear coming down her face, and I realized that I've caught this at a really bad moment. That she was maybe not being lauded by this, what I think is one of the best projects I've ever seen in the school. I wanted to put it up because I think what it does get at really something important about this school, thinking about the different sensibilities of quote, different disciplines. Because our student body is made up of a collection, 350, 400 of truly different sensibilities. You come here, the majority of them come here, something that actually you didn't mention in the history, most of the students here have no architecture background, or very little. In fact, they can't have more than, I think, 2 studios in order to get into the MArch-1 program. This young lady, which was later in a studio of mine, had this sensibility. She knew how to sew. She made her own clothes. They were fantastic clothes, too. She could have sold them, but fantastic clothes. But she also had a computer background. In fact, she sold her .com company at the height of the .com craze to come, because she got tired of it, to come to the GSD and put herself in this vulnerable position, and that was her first project. So it's an airport. It's a furry airport. Isn't that fantastic? That's it. That's it. Now, I'll stop.
Are you the moderator?
I'm not a I've never been asked to moderate either. No.
You can spend the panel discussing who's going to moderate. Sit over here.
It's on? Yes. No, I'm fine. It's good. So we're on doing the home stretch. there will be a reception soon, so there'll be drinks and things like that. So Mike, thank you. As I mentioned, we then, after this experience and sort of seeing some of the things that Karen and Mac and Rolf had discussed, then also asked Francisca to go and find out about what's happening in the field of design in relation to education. And of course, Sanford has also been very intimately involved with the art, design, and the public domain program that Krzysztof Wodiczko has been the program leader. So I think we really want to try and open this up very quickly and to really get more feedback from the people who already spoke, just in terms of your experience and what you think are some of the possibilities and ideas that we can follow. But I'm also very keen to hear from all of you, just in terms of what your thoughts and reactions are to what we have seen and heard this afternoon. But perhaps I could ask Francisca just also very briefly now, because, if you could just tell us a little bit in terms of what you found that was interesting in your research about education related to design.
Well, so we go into the last part. I'll try to keep it moving swiftly. I think as Mose mentioned at the beginning, I was commissioned actually, well, by him and by the school to actually do a little bit of research regarding design and design schools today. I have to say that, well, the task, in fact, was to actually understand ultimately what could be some of the things that could be involved in or could be incorporated or could enhance design studies here at the GSD. I have to go a little bit back, maybe just to say that for me, education is quite important in terms of actually understanding. I was trained as an architect, and actually my own work has led me more into urban studies rather than, and multidisciplinary urban studies rather than design. But I did do my PhD on architectural design, actually, and history of architectural design, and in Italy, basically, during the 60s and 70s. And so for me, actually, the idea of education is one that is quite passionate. I'm quite passionate about the notion of education, and this is maybe for a series of reasons, actually. When we think about education, of course, we think about, training people now, but that will actually be working also in 20 years' time, right? So we're really thinking about a sort of future projection of our professions, whichever one those are, right? There is therefore an obligation, I think, to understand where the discipline is going. And one thing that I did, I think, conclude also from my own studies of education in Italy during the 60s and 70s, and the importance especially of the student movement, is that the fight there was actually for, what the school was teaching in terms of its relation to society. That means that basically it was really about gaining position within, within the faculties and within the in this case, architecture students were really quite passionate about that in terms of, what they would be teaching so that, or what they would be learning, sorry, so that they could, in fact, go out into the world and exercise that. I say this because I think that position, in a way, is very important in terms of, what, if we analyze today what's going on in the design world. And basically what I did in terms of method was, I did look, of course, at a lot of information about the schools, and I talked to, but I basically talked to the actual people who were running the schools, who were actually also part of teaching staffs and so on, to actually understand what their position was in terms of the discipline. I think it's the only way that you can go about something like this, because if you look at, internet or you look at information brochures, you're not going to really get anything. Ultimately, it is about people positioning themselves into a certain school. I'm not going to say imposing, but I'm going to say imposing, although I don't know if that's the right word, but imposing a certain idea of what design is. So actually going through and talking to all these people, I was quite impressed, especially coming from an architectural background, about actually the breadth and the experimentation that's going on today in design. I have to say, probably, you know, out of ignorance, I didn't imagine that it was that wide. I'm sure that most of you know more about this, and you know about the crossovers between design and science, and between, of course, all the social experimentations and these kind of things, and also about 3D printing and all the technology and so on. But I was quite impressed, by the sheer width of the amount of things that were going on, and I found that a couple of things were interesting in these terms. One is actually this kind of shift towards an understanding of what design does in terms of its position, an object being positioned in space, an object being positioned within society, which is something that, I mean, of course, it has its history, but I was quite impressed by the amount of people that were actually thinking about this. And the other, I guess, I have to say, is the extent of the designer's role, or the ambition of the extent of the designer's role. And here I would like to say that apart from the actual or specific kind of domain, so science or technology or these kind of things, actually the idea that also designers today have the potential to become provokers or mediators, looking at actually a kind of wider and a more open idea of design. So not really only based on the object, but actually kind of based also on spatial practices that are much larger than just the object or just interior design. So these are the things that I kind of looked at. Of course, these were looked at through the schools, and particular schools have particular focuses, and I don't want to go into all the schools, I don't think that's particularly interesting at this moment. But I do think that there's a series of things that can, in fact, be incorporated. A few kind of, conclusions just regarding the schools that I actually went and saw and talked to people of those. A lot of them are actually quite experimental and still keep a sort of very open attitude, even if they have specific focuses. They keep an open attitude towards methods and forms of actually undertaking projects. I don't know, I'm thinking about the RCA, for example, and the idea of actually shifting from one theme to another, even if they call it interaction designs, that interaction design is quite open. It's not maybe, the sort of interface that we previously thought of. Another thing is that because of this, basically most schools or a lot of programs are quite small in terms of actual space, and they're mostly, and I think this is where maybe some of the things that we were talking about before become interesting, is that a lot of them are built up on relationships, basically, on relationships that actually are undertaken because of specific projects. So maybe, the actual space that the students will have will only be a kind of very small room or something like this, but either being inside a bigger institution and therefore taking advantage, or actually building up partnerships for specific projects, you also sort of, are built up in a kind of wider form. Last but not least, of course, many of these, and especially the more experimental programs, are, of course, based on the willpower and the kind of conviction of certain people, so of certain persons who actually undertake that and take these programs to a kind of wider audience, and so are able to sort of, again, place their position on the table and actually convince others of that. Regarding, maybe just to go a little bit regarding the GSD, I guess, and some of the things that we were talking about, I spoke of the width and the breadth of experimentation that actually surprised me, and it surprised me in a positive way. When I say surprise, it's something very positive. Even more than maybe we've talked about here today, because basically we've mostly concentrated on objects today, and there's been a lot of talk about interior design. And I think these things are very, very interesting, and I think they can be a very good link and a very interesting link for a series of reasons. I'm thinking about research and, search for new models, for example, or new forms of inhabiting space. A couple of projects that actually Jonathan is involved in at the moment, the exterior office. Also, you told me last time you were working on new forms of workspaces, I guess, with Noel again. I think those are, really kind of sort of interesting in terms of the possibilities of breaking models of what we're used to, right? Of course, the total environment, or the environment design environment of environments, large-scale environments such as airports and these kind of things. Of course, there's a perfect link. And I would say also, in terms of interior design, this idea of architecture, which I don't know, floats around, I guess, I'm not really exactly sure of everybody's position on this, but for me, actually, architecture is inside and outside and also context. And so I don't kind of see a division. I do realize that in the last years, or I think that in the last years, architecture has lost a lot of ground with regards to the interior, especially because of specialists, of health specialists or commercial specialists. And this, we get to a certain point where we're almost designing a sort of shell. And so here, I think there's also a potential not only in terms of incorporating design, but actually kind of enhancing what architecture at this moment is, which I think is also interesting. However, I would also, and this is where I'm going to end, but I would also not kind of not consider larger scale projects. I think that, for example, many of the programs that I did visit are actually involved in large community or urban scale projects. Helping with, for example, envisioning alternative scenarios for different landscapes, or as much as the kind of massive change program, and also some of the projects that are being done at the RCA again are, for example, regard policy making or policy shaping, and so I think that these things are also on a different level, maybe not architecture, but more urban planning, maybe more regarding landscape design and so on, could be also a different idea. So I don't, or something else that could be incorporated. So I wouldn't kind of just say it's only interior or object in space, or as I think also the art and public domain program does, how to affect the city from an art installation point of view. But also I think there's other fields that are also opening up in terms of design, and maybe these could also be beneficial for programs here.
Thank you. Karen, you've been involved with many of these discussions from the beginning, I don't know whether it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago already, when we were when we started, no, well, maybe it's longer. Anyway, so I'm just wondering, also with your own experience and teaching also in this design programs, what are some of your thoughts?
There's been a lot of different things sort of floating around, and one of the big issues that's come up in different ways is the difference between specialization and the kind of blurring of boundaries. And we've heard from people who could call themselves a variety of things. They could call themselves designers, they could call themselves architects, but they do a little bit of all of that. And certainly that's an ongoing issue here at the GSD, the difference between specializing and yet also being aware that interdisciplinarity, or what you call transdisciplinarity, that those are things that are very prevalent today. And so the natural question then comes, okay, if we have a school like the GSD that has an architecture program, a landscape architecture program, an urban design and planning program, what about the other scales of design? What about design of objects? What about the design of interior spaces? So that's really how I got involved in the conversation. As Max said, Rolf Feldbaum asked the question to me initially, why doesn't a place like Harvard teach interior design? And I basically punted and asked him to ask Mac and Moisen. I mean, I had my own responses to that question, but it became a kind of interesting conversation, and Mac and I talked about it a lot, that actually if Mac wanted to stand up and say that he was going to do a studio about interior design, he could pretty much guarantee that he wouldn't have anybody who would take his studio. So yet there were issues in that studio that he could teach that people would find interesting. So how do you address the issue of things that have that everyone finds interesting without somehow alienating everyone by the term interior design? And then there's, of course, the whole question, why is interior design considered to be such an alienating concept in architecture? And Mac is somebody who never shies away from anything that's difficult, and he just went headlong into the idea of trying to teach thinking about interior design, but doing it, I guess, really through furniture as a way of tightening the scale of things. And I think that proved to be a really interesting way to engage a group of students. And it also became a kind of way for the school to start, I think, thinking about, is there really a difference between interior design and architecture? What is that difference, if there is one? And how do you teach something like that?
I should say, Rolf purchased the wiggle chair that actually wiggled. It's in his museum now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I had some time. Thanks, Mohsen. Because, well, first of all, I'd like to say I found today incredibly stimulating and provocative, and I learned a lot. I really wish the whole school had been here. Maybe not everyone was quite as ignorant as I was, but I can't imagine that anyone wouldn't have benefited hugely from the scope and the incredible sort of inventiveness that we saw in areas, I have to say, quite frankly, I was highly prejudiced before today about what I expected from certain areas of the design industry, and found it today to be incredibly just exciting as hell. Having said that, that's what everybody expects from the theorist, right? Having said that, and then the whole thing flips the other way. But in fact, I have to say I was totally inspired by the last thing I saw, and feel that in a way that's what I would like to address. Now, it's true that as a theorist, the idea is to try to take as great a distance as possible, to fly as high as possible in order to see the large landscape in which all of the actions, objects, and let's just say the projects exist, and to try to understand exactly what type of configuration or pattern they produce. We, in ways, were brought here today to ask if there was a way of producing a partial snapshot of, where things are going. But again, as a theorist, there are reflexes that one has, and one should perhaps also try to remind oneself to ask also, of course, in addition to that question, is really where, the question might be, where could things go? Now, there's a phrase that's always haunted me, and it came up today in more than one way, and it's dal cucchiaio alla città, from the spoon to the city. When I was apprenticing, so to speak, in architecture, there was one test I learned, always gained a certain kind of an upper hand, and that was the litmus test would be, what does this, in any architectural object, what does it have to do with the city? And I would say that in terms of what we're talking about today, that's one of the great advantages of thinking about this kind of design in an academy. And I want to say that's where I really want to go, is to discuss some of the things that we saw that Mac showed us, because I think they're incredibly important. So the relationship of the spoon to the city has typically been completely misunderstood and really, rendered platitudinous to the degree that it's been understood that design is something that can be universally and seamlessly applied from every object in our lives, from the spoon to the city. That's not right. What it really meant is, in what way do the relations that produce us at the level of the city find themselves manifested or even surreptitiously embedded in the spoon? And it's only with that perspective, I think, that one can, in a certain sense, achieve the type of design thinking that, in a way, we who are more protected, clearly, that's one thing that really impressed me, is the way these guys live on the edge. I had no idea. I thought you guys got billions of dollars for your 3 hours of work. Or your, not 3 hours, I meant 3 years. 3 years. 3 years. 3 years. No, I'm totally impressed with the amount of time and research that goes into these projects. There was nothing Freudian about that, guys.
You're not going to get out of this?
You know what? I'm running out of here when this is over. But I have something to say. For me, also theorists talk too much. But so much of it is to try to create the context you have one line. That's what I felt. I had one line today. I want to create the context so that it would be perhaps understood. So bottom line, what is design and design thinking? It can be not thought through unless we really think about the way in which it's that relationship, let's say, between the spoon and the city, in which let's say, the processes of rationalization, let's say, social, but also, you know, in our general history, are integrated materially, if you like, into our lives. Now, where I want to get to has to do a little bit with that extraordinary film that, well, all the films were incredible, actually. And there is something already about that step one goes to when one produces the narrative and the mood in a four-dimensional environment like a film. And it really does change the whole thing because there's this incredible presence of the psychic integration of the objects in one's lives, which we saw right from the beginning. That thing was like some moody Spanish film from the 1960s, to this incredible thing about the Aeron chair. Now, I've been living in an Aeron chair for almost 15 years. I don't know why, I bought one like the day it came out because I thought, wow. But the truth of the matter is as comfortable it is, I'm always in incredible unease as I sit in it. And the reason is very clear. It was clear to me, but seeing this film just brought it to the head. And I had to bring this up, and that is ultimately the processes, the social processes within which we live. They're cruel. And there is something very cruel about that chair. And the dystopic, the rendering dystopic, if you like, of the total world in which a chair like that is conceived, invented, and then in some ways attached to the body. The way the chair is designed to completely anticipate every possible move you can make at the desk strikes me as something that needs to be placed in as large a context as possible. There has to be, I don't mean critical, I just mean a very broad overview of how design produces us and in some ways corrupts us, deforms us, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the only way to do that is to look at the general processes that take place in our society and these general developments. And the word I wanted to leave was there is a kind of an ethos which we tend much too often, and I believe that in many ways all of the presentations that I heard today in some ways embody a general consensus that the world of what is often known as, post-Fordism has become a good thing that should be embraced without really trying to understand in what ways design can change our relationship to those economic processes and perhaps liberate aspects of the human being from this image, I guess, that Max Weber was the one who gave us of being simply a vocational man, a productive, personnel, if you like, in our society. And I think that it is in the university or in the graduate school where questions like that, the broader questions can be posed, which frankly I wonder the degree to which the industrial world is really able to entertain that kind of research.
We can all go home now.
Yeah. Well, that's a provocation really to the designers who must deep down feel that unease about, in a way, about everything they produce, in the sense in which it simply oils the gears of consumerism, media, and integration, if you like, as a productive individual into a workforce, the ways in which the mind, in fact, is routinized by the designs that we produce, or merely anesthetized in some cases by the kinds of shopping pleasures that design has come to represent in its largest context. Perhaps maybe in the what is it called? The gift shop curation idea. You know, what can a gift shop be? Could it be this sinister environment of the film we saw?
Any
responses from
I don't want to
any
shut
of the
down the conversation.
presenters? Or
It's-
I can respond on a couple of levels. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking about chairs. I loathe that chair, absolutely. And I'll tell you why I loathe that chair. First of all, we don't make it. But I think that the other reason why is that it's extremely prescriptive. And the other question is, and this is an office furniture manufacturer telling you something, that you know what, you're not supposed to sit down for 8 hours. So the basic principle of maintaining comfort in a chair for 8 hours, when you really shouldn't sit down for more than an hour at a time before you get up and walk around, is the most ridiculous concept on the face of the earth. So the question associated with that chair is that, has it been borne upon us by insurance companies, the ridiculous nature of this abstract concept of ergonomics? Until 2 years ago, you had to wear 4-inch high heels in Germany in order to sit correctly in your chair in a secretarial setting when you had an armless chair. That's until very recently. This is bullshit, frankly. But the other question is that you can't then relegate every other chair. So let's talk a second about what is the chair in an overall environment. In an interior space, when you're in an office or you're someplace associated with where a particular person sits, okay, you ascribe the understanding of that person's presence or not and the space belonging to them by that chair. Okay?
You're talking
So the
about
office
social
chair, correct.
partitioning.
The office chair
Your chair
takes
becomes
on
you.
the relationship or the understanding of it is you. You understand that that person is there or not there based on the fact that that figurative object is in that physical space. So the real question is that who serves who, right? Is it the chair that's you, or is it that you that's you? Should you sit on a ball? Should you sit on the floor? Should you, if you listen to Galen Krantz, who's a great scribe who wrote a book called The Chair, who's someone who deals with the Alexander technique, she says the chair is the ruination of Western civilization, okay? So I don't necessarily disagree with her.
You sure don't, yeah.
So the question is that we're a company that makes chairs, okay? So why do I bend over ass backwards to talk to people about the fact that I think that prescriptive ergonomy and chairs like that we looked at are virtual medieval torture devices and are incorrect? And why do we develop chairs and look at materiality that allow people to, and I'm going to use it a marketing term, and that's an interesting thing that really wasn't mentioned today, although subliminally by the whole Target thing in terms of the quackery that are considered products that are based on marketing concepts that are crap. But so that was a part of today's conversation that didn't happen. But, I mean, how do you deal with that? You have to make a product that deals with the way in which a society works. I will also go so far as to say that it's okay to design a product that people just like, okay? So it's nice to have an object around me, be it a piece of furniture or a watch or whatever the hell it is, that gives me great pleasure. A lot of the time, that's a building, too. There are buildings that I like to go into. I like to be in the intimate spaces and the public spaces. So the argument, I think, is a similar one. I can't think you cannot extract everything associated with being a torture device in that sense, because, in fact, that film is correct. That's what that object is about. But how do you define, the real problem is, how do you define the problem? What are you solving for? That's the basis.
That's what we need to do.
Right. You have to you have to put together a list. For me, it's a brief. I say, what are the things that I have to solve?
What do you do with these ideas? Do you talk about this stuff at Knoll?
All the time.
Yeah, it's
These are
easy enough,
real
right? Because it's a Herman Miller chair.
No, but I can say that about products that we have. We have a chair that I detest. It was a chair that was based on a styling exercise, based in an idea that said, we want to have a low-cost chair that's about penetration into our dealer markets and distribution, and what we're going to do is style manufactured parts. It's crap, okay? It doesn't sell. It's a product that has absolutely nothing to do with our image. So come on, those are the kinds of things that get weeded out of a collection. The company has integrity. It has a background. It has an understanding of what those objects are. Please don't dismiss them. Please don't dismiss the thought process that goes into defining the problem and trying to help people do what it is that they do all day long in their work, however it is that they need to do it. Those are the serious questions. I could be critical of
work that I have done where I have not, where I've made mistakes and so on and so forth. But to get back to one of Murray's points earlier in terms of how are you looking at what other people are doing and how are you looking and how are you bringing those companies together? Well, it's the same question in the reverse. How are you internalizing those things as a good corporate citizen to understand what your products are and how they work well for people and can be a commercial success and give you a 35 GP and sell 50,000 units a year and pay a designer a 3% royalty so that they can raise a family and have kids and send them to Harvard. So the real question, I mean, those are real things.
You know, I think this idea that product design is somehow differently from architecture because it's a commercial product is a little absolutely it's a commercial product, absolutely, in all sorts of ways. I don't think that's a distinction difference between. I've worked with Herman Miller for like 20 years doing buildings for them, and I can tell you not one time did they talk about commerce. I've watched their products developed. We took 2 years to try to find a site for one of their buildings, and then when we found it, we had a picnic, and then we had a year of sitting around thinking about the nature of the picnic. I mean, they have just as much concern for society, for technique, for the environment, et cetera, as any architect does.
You do have to distinguish between the good intentions that are harbored by most designers and the sometimes limited purview that contributes to the consensus. And I would like to say that as far as I can tell from the inside and the outside a little bit, it seems there is generally what you represented in your response does not seem to me to reflect the consensus that one sees in in the design, in the object and industrial design world. Efficiency, optimization, comfort, and a certain kind of, I would say, a shallow pleasure rather than the deeper ones that, let's say, Knoll is building their identity and reputation on, still with, I say, the grace of God, because it's not forever, given where things are going thanks to the Apple ethos, etc. So we need to understand in a way that that's the role that we would play, let's say. This is to insist on keeping the boundaries pulled really rather wide, and that the exposure essentially to historical, rhetorical, and other forces, etc., theoretical, philosophical, and then, you know, scientific. It can take place in a broader, a different type of environment, that's all. And there's a discourse which is always required in every design. And, you know, even though it's been incredibly interesting to see how smart these guys are who were brought together here, you guys don't represent the, let's just say, the level that one would find, generally speaking, out there. And I have to say, you've got to have a private, not a private life, I meant a secret life. If you've really got those ideas, I don't see them operating in a current way within a corporate structure like Knoll. I just find it, you know, it's fascinating.
Why would you say that that's not true? What is it that you see that we do that currently does not serve that goal?
Well, you know, value, one of the great revolutions that took place, if you like, in this kind of neo-Fordist and then post-neo-Fordist, or no, rather, post-Fordist and then neo-post-Fordist thing, you know, as one moved from the kind of way in which our society was organized around certain forms of bureaucracy and communications, like the television, for example, I mean, your legacy is really around that world of, you know, the post-war and the television and the way in which identity, subjectivity, and taste were formed, if you like, in that kind of way. That changed, of course, when the TV mutated into the computer. Now it's mutating again into a whole different form of sort of bureaucratic organization, let's say, just to use a cliche, like, you know, with the cloud and the... we are now looking at everything is environmental, or is interpreted to be environmental, and there are dangers because, no, let's just say it's a minefield with great potential, but also with, you know, great peril. when we conceive of every design object as an animate object or an object that speaks back to you. In many ways, the model for the object today in design, I say implicitly, and I would defend this against all you guys who are going to say I'm wrong, it's the computer, or it's the interactive, slightly charming, almost animate device. And we like to impart to everything we design today a little bit of those qualities. Well, listen, you guys are a little bit of an anomaly.
No, I don't think that we're an anomaly. I don't know that everyone in the furniture industry is doing that, but there are a lot of companies that are doing that. I think that the real question is that objects most of the time should really just go away. If it's about a level of interaction and someone has to use something, it's not about the damn table. It's about what happens at the table. And I think that there's one of the big things going on in our industry.
See, now I would say please continue and don't lose it, but I say now you're becoming part of the problem and no longer part of the solution by saying, are you advocating that that's the proper modality of the production and reception of a design object today, is the multidimensional sensorium?
Is that the table needs to be a very simple thing. It's about being a horizontal plane. It doesn't have to have all kinds of jazzy crap-ass shit all over it.
Gotcha.
That doesn't add any value to it in any capacity. That is about a marketing checklist for someone to sell something because someone else has that. I mean, look at the American automobile industry. It's gone to hell in a handbasket associated with that concept. It's embarrassing. So the real question is that what are we talking about here? I'm talking about design excellence and the achievement of very specific goals and moving things forward to a crimson heady crowd who are supposed to be the next leaders of what it is that we're talking about. Please don't, I get what you're saying, but I'm not making a criticism of that. Our goal is to move that forward. Someone else.
Let's get a few more ideas. There is.
Maybe I could change.
I know, but there is a mic there. There's Justin, then there's Cara.
Could change the discussion just a little bit. I'd like to ask Karen, as it relates to education. You looked
Francisca. This is Francisca. This is Karen.
I'm Karen.
Oh.
So Francisca, as it relates to education, you looked at professional education. Did you look beyond that to what is the genesis of good education for the design process? And maybe I could extend that a little bit to Vil, because he asked a question. He spoke about Finland. What does a small country on the edge of the world contribute so much to design, whether it's Artec or Arabia or Skype or telephones, cell phones? What is it about that education system that has contributed to design excellence? Let me just broaden it with one more thought, which is in a world that there is crowdsourcing and Lego is reinventing the notion of design and creativity, to what extent does that come into play in changing the way we think about design education?
Justin, and then can we get the mic to Cara here, please? We've got one.
It's not a question, and it's really good to see this kicking off finally. But I mean, I also love that film about the Aeron chair, and to bring it back to architecture, Marc Auger's theory that the definition of supermodernity is too much space. For me, the definition of supermodernity in design is too much function, and I think we've taken this modernist idea to its absurd conclusion now, and it's going further and further. But I think it starts in '94 with the Aeron chair, where as you said, it's this kind of everything, and the film said everything is possible, but what ends up happening is you become a slave to your work and a slave to your chair. But for me, like someone like Rainer Banham, who was the first critic to really, the first architecture critic to really engage with design and what design meant to society, design meant a different thing then, because for him it was really a liberating social force, so that his mum didn't have to be a slave to household drudgery anymore because she had a washing machine. Whereas when you get things like the Aeron chair, or when you get like air freshener that doesn't just mask the smell but eliminates the smell like some kind of magic antimatter, we're getting it to a whole new level of kind of commodity fetishism, and it's about hyper performance. And the difficult thing is how you keep that social value of design, which is not just about selling through through magic, basically.
Cara, but before you speak, it would be good to also hear from Joseph and Jörg and Jonathan, just your reactions to some of the things you've seen and heard, just like the film and the idea of design as presented in the video. So maybe I go to Cara and then I come back to you. Yes, please.
Okay, I had, is this on?
Just try it, though. Maybe just hit the top.
Oh, okay. I had actually a follow-up question about education as well, because I think that was one of the points about today's discussion, is that how, and this might be a question actually for the manufacturers to respond to, but how would you advise a school like the GSD, which focuses primarily on architecture, planning, and landscape, but yet it's a school, it's a department within a school that has many strengths around the university. How do you think, given that situation, how they might be able to train the students in a more interdisciplinary way? And second of all, what is the ideal designer coming to you? Who are you looking for in today's world? Young designer, what are they bringing? What are you looking for? And what can this education here, how can that inform them?
Can you hold your thought, and I'll go to Joseph, and then we'll
I think
come
we're just going to add one too many questions to the mix here. But I think it's interesting to imagine the manifesto as an attempt to arrive at a solution, given the Aron chair essentially establishing criteria for how to create a design for the masses, yet it's establishing is kind of a situation where you can then sit for longer instead of essentially imagining how to reimagine the workplace itself, or what is the problem? Maybe what is the intention of the designer, and how can you solve a problem maybe without even coming up with an object? I think, and maybe that kicks into what is the education policy and practice for understanding design. I also think it's really interesting that the Harvard GSD is called the Graduate School of Design, and yet design as its own entity does not engage, but architecture and landscape and urbanism and interior design, they all fall under this umbrella. So it seems just the logical next step to even further dissolve these boundaries and just say anything goes if you're taking into consideration the same approach to architecture as you are to urban design or philosophical approach, then you can easily venture into objects or furniture or whatever.
Can I just plant a little question and then ask Francisca to respond? One of the things that's important to clarify is that we never said that there is interior design that we want to do. I think that there is the attention to the interior as a theme, as a certain set of questions. The same way we have had a series of conferences, for example, one that just came out as a book called In the Life of Cities, which is really about the examination of the relationship between the physical city and the life. Therefore, the question of what about the interior is as much around these questions of the exploration of the interrelationships at these multiple scales as a mode of practice, as a mode of thought. That's sort of something that I think is worth maybe bearing in mind. The other thing, just as a piece of provocation, the other night at the Design Awards, talking to Ross Lovegrove, he was saying that most of the people that are working for him, and I know some of them, are architects, and that he finds that the people who come from a design education actually have no process. And what he likes about hiring architects to work in his design practice is because architecture has a process, whatever that is for us. I know what he means, but I think that's also an interesting thing. So in a way, the whole question around education is not so clear that the education related to the making or the design of a specific set of objects, for example, or products, necessarily means that it corresponds correctly, if you like, to the future enhancement of us developing those. So what I think is interesting for us is to ask that question both as much for architecture as we do for this product design or design more broadly. And I think studios like Max open up that conversation, and we of course have also the opportunity to do this kind of work through the studio. The only problem is that singular studios don't necessarily establish a mode of thought. They establish certain specific moments of thought. In other words, it's not the same as the Department of Architecture that defines more broadly a certain set of practices and disciplines. So we can have nuggets of incredible work and imagination, but how do we also enhance that to expand or extend to other kinds of practices? So I think that also raises some pedagogical, practical issues that I think are interesting to put on the table.
I think it would actually be interesting. There's some students here from Mac's past two studios, and it would be interesting to hear from them what they thought was different or beneficial or not beneficial about those studios, because my impression with my interaction with those students was they definitely thought the studios were different. Sure. So maybe you could, you know who you are.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say two things to your question.
Talk to the mic.
Sorry. Just, is that okay? Can you hear me? Just two things to the question. It's true that the schools and the programs that we analyze were all graduate programs, as are the ones in this school, and which means actually that people already arrive, or students already arrive with a certain with a certain background to begin with, and also having some work, or most of them have some work experience. They were also really designed programs, so we're really talking about design as opposed to architecture or to urbanism or something like this. And in that sense, well, I mean, there's a lot of different sort of approaches to this, but I would say that most schools tend to want to make or how do you say this? Enhance actually the individual in terms of their own interests, and actually instill, and probably this is the kind of thing, is a sort of criticism towards the objects that they are producing, a sort of self-criticism towards the objects that they're producing. So basically, at least in many of the programs that I found more interesting and also that are quite successful today, in fact, there is more than teaching or passing on certain skills or certain things like this. It's really about thinking about putting the person in a kind of position, right, to actually be able to understand again what that design is actually doing within society, within the field and within space, right. Finally, just to I know you asked the question also to Villa, but I think there's also different sorts of education at the same time, and it's not only school-based. I said before that most of these people or most of the participants actually do have a bit of work under their belts, and I think that that's also, of course, we talked about practice and how that teaches you also, and how that's really kind of where probably the hardest part begins in a way, the actual work. There's also I think different centers of innovation, like for example in Daba, who are out of South Africa, come out of South Africa, and it's really it's a company actually, or a corporation that actually has placed South Africa and Cape Town at the center of the world map of design, if you will, through the work actually of creating conferences and creating workshops and creating competitions in a place where they didn't exist before. So I think there's actually different sort of modes also of operation, and people kind of are educated or also choose these things as different modes of actually improving their own education. The second part I didn't understand too well. Did I go?
We're here. We come to you,
Yeah.
and then maybe Jonathan. Are there any of Mac's students here who want to speak?
Oh, there you go.
Just briefly about the Finnish education system and the schools of architecture and design. It is actually quite the system in a way is cool in many ways and perfect in several other ways. The universities are free, but then the nation's population is extremely small, only 5 million. But there's a policy that the schools don't take many students to the programs. As an example, you can calculate with your hands how many theaters there's in Finland. And as an example, I believe a few years back they only accepted 2 students to study scenography, just because of the fact that there isn't jobs available. And I think annually they take to the product design course 12 students. And there's 2 top universities in Finland, and so it is quite cruel. But the attention that each student gets per teacher is quite big. And
Say that I was in Helsinki a couple of months ago, and so got a short history lesson. I understood though that a lot of the transformations that have happened in Finland have to do with the economic transformations. You said that at one point, I mean, you were a relatively poor nation, and I think there was a specific policy of trying to see what it is that you need to do to get out of that situation. So, in fact, there is a design, there's a kind of radical agenda that happened where you did move towards design and technology, and you don't have a long history of those companies. There's a very a lot of those companies have come about during a relatively short period of time.
Very true, yeah. And now, since a year and a half ago, the main 3 universities, the School of Economics, the University of Technology, and the University of Art and Design fused together. And this was an initiative of the School of Design when they realized that they had one project called Industrial Design Business Management, where they combined always a company, students from economical background from the business school, and engineers and designers, and then that, let's say 15 years ago, then that ended up that these 3 universities fused, and now it's called the Aalto University. But when it comes to the question regarding the company that I work for, we represent a very, very narrow industry, and because of the company size and the possibilities that we can work on, maybe only under 10 projects each year, what we expect from a designer that we work with is extremely good understanding in one particular area that they have to solve, and not so much someone who can master all different scales but has perfection, let's say, in background in carpentry or lighting design or a particular unique qualification. So that's from my part, trying to answer Kara's question.
We need to wrap up soon, so I want to please go to you, to Jonathan, if you, and then maybe you can get the mic to the student. Please, you go ahead. No, you go ahead. Please.
Speak a little bit to this idea that you began with this multidisciplinary approach to design, and the idea that there is an underlying pedagogy, I think, that addresses all forms of design. There's a pedagogy that addresses both the methodology, which is the design process, and the methodology which refers to abstraction, and this idea that abstraction and the elements of design and abstraction can be applied to various kinds of scales of projects. So as a person who's trained as an interior designer and as an industrial designer and has worked in both of those areas, I can say that I think that these fundamentals of abstraction, and then the idea that we, I think, approach design using a process that's similar in architecture and in industrial design and in interior design, makes us universally capable, I think, of approaching these projects. And the other thing, just my observation, is that Knoll and Herman Miller and Artec are ideal clients for industrial designers. I think that these are the companies that we really look to as being the proponents of design, as the companies that are driving design in the best sense. And I would say, having worked with companies like Cuisinart and other manufacturers, that the design brief is an intrinsic part of working, you know, on an industrially designed object, and that the word that no one has really used today is anthropology. And, you know, Carrie suggested that industrial designers love to go to the Cooper Hewitt and go through the archive and look at the objects there and then create an exhibition that's based on the references from those objects. And I think that that sort of speaks to the fact that we are connected to these objects that we use, and we are searching for the reasons why these objects were designed. And that's sort of the foundation, I think, of where industrial design comes from.
Jonathan?
I could go so many ways, but just in a way, feeding off of what you were saying, something that really struck me about Kara's image of the iPhone and the stone or the arrowhead in juxtaposition, it's something that I always, and again, a little bit touches on the ideas of education and preparation that were brought up, is that in design, industrial design education, design history starts with the Bauhaus, which is really sad. I mean, there are thousands of years of humans existing in relationships to objects, and we can really learn valuable lessons from examples like the 18th century Parisian cafes, where differentiating exchange allowed people to communicate very directly and in a way crafted the kind of communal ideals that we really want to see forming in society. And I think then, like, if we look at that those relationships that often go understudied or under discussed in design, and then we start to look at this idea that Sanford brought up about, like, consumption, and I start thinking about how, like, for instance, I remember in Mutations was one of the first books that I bought on design when I was 18 years old and 19 years old. In that book, they had this real description of
he just aged you.
They have this real description of the shopping space in airports, and how the kind of dollar per square foot is rationalized in these kind of shopping spaces. And I think that's a perfect example of architecture and design falling victim, or rather playing the hand of some of the evil forces in this world, or the forces that really kind of bring about a kind of a blatant consumerist attitude without any communal values other than you walk through our mall, you buy, and then you get on your plane. And rather than having some kind of communal environment where people can sit and enjoy time, and you're kind of forced or shuffled through the shopping mall, and it's the products on display, and it's the architects who worked on that space, and it's the developers who are really, I think, the more discourse we can have between design and architecture, the more tools we would gain to counter that attitude in society that often, I think, degrades some of the more important rituals we can help establish. So, yeah.
Sanford, you want to speak up or no? Go. It's fine. You can be controversial. Jörg, and then do you have the mic or no?
I'll be brief.
Please. Thank you.
No, I mean, it might be a stupid question, but somehow, I mean, we keep talking about design, and I just realized I actually studied visual communication, so in a way, graphic design. And no one, that's kind of the elephant in the room right now for me, because no one has talked about graphic design the whole day. Oh, maybe I did a bit.
Yeah, but, you know, we were thinking about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But in a sense that it's a thing of the past almost. No, I mean, it's because in a way, I mean, if you talk about education and a design department, I think the exciting places that I've seen is where there's all these versions of design being taught, and students start working together, even if you don't encourage maybe interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary works, but it will just naturally happen, especially if you have a space like the one you have here where people can actually see each other. They're not hidden in like different buildings or something. Well, maybe they would be, but yeah, so I was just curious, is that on the map at all, or is that something you're just...
Well, the thing is that we are not necessarily thinking about starting an art school or a big. It's more really reaching out to certain adjacencies and relational conditions that have the possibility of creating or disrupting some of one's current practices and affecting others. So I think that our approach has to be somehow systematic, but also one that can be manageable and at the same time quite radical in a way. So we do some of what you are saying by having courses like having Lars Muller here as a publisher and working with students in terms of what it is that making a book is about, and therefore typography and graphic design is part of that. But we introduce that through a discussion about issues of presentation, representation, media, sensory media, all of those things, as opposed to having necessarily a department, for example, of graphic design. Or now we are creating certain things in the last few years called platforms. And one of these platforms is called the sensory media platform. There is another one on history and theory. There's one on practice. There's one on technology. And these platforms are almost like departments, except that they are much more malleable. They are constituted of the faculty from certain areas of expertise, as opposed to the structure of a department. So we have departments, but then the platforms are transversal structures that run across the different departments. So things like graphic design are part of sensory media, which exists across a variety of different. So the nature of our pedagogy, we don't necessarily want to reconstruct the Bauhaus in a way. So we also have to think about how we're going to create new kinds of structures.
Just want to say something, man. We really are thinking about it. At least I am. No, I mean, I have a particularly distorted past where I learned about it, in a way, about design methodology through communications design as well. But typography is I know this, but I would like to say it. So it is a world unto itself, and largely because not only is it an environment, but it has incredible the way it plays on the brain and evokes everything from memory to all kinds of affects of comfort and not. It is so demanding on the brain in a passive way that, in a way, it is far more powerful. But it's than architecture, but it is a model. Yeah, because architecture smacks you in the face, but typography is massaging your brain in a deep way without you realizing it, etc.
Please go ahead. And if there are any other students who would like to, if you have any thoughts or reflections about what you've heard and the school afterwards, please be ready. Go ahead.
So the task is to, I guess, testify to what it's like to have the experience of a Mac studio. I think...
You need to speak up.
I'll talk louder and... Okay, that's better. I think the distinction between a Mac studio and all the others that I've taken is that the Mac doesn't define a difference between the object or what we call design all day and what has been called architecture for my past 8 years of education. The only way to be scolded in that studio was to make that kind of distinction. So I think by erasing the difference between the object, the interior, and what we used to call architecture, I used to call architecture, that made a radical enough difference that it's not a matter of taking a different type of course or approaching a different type of assignment in a different program directed by different people. I think in that studio it was very clear that it's approaching the same type of issues we deal with in every studio in a different way and in a little bit more of a naive, less distinction, allow everything to be on the table at the same time sort of manner. That's the only quick way I can describe it.
Don't you feel good? You feel good.
Mac will give you the money afterwards. Yes.
I was okay.
Any other students? Please, do you have a mic?
Thank you all very much for a very informative, very useful panel. Through my experience, it seems like in every architecture program that they try to introduce the interior concept and the concept of kind of furniture. It seems very connected to what we do, and like you were saying, that it's very useful. And it's never separate. It doesn't become a separate entity for me through the experience I've had with kind of taking a furniture studio or kind of embedding that. It's once it's introduced into an architecture program, it seems to become a part of it very seamlessly, and I think it's a very good step forward for architects and designers to and since the way we are kind of trained through an architecture program to have, like the gentleman was saying, Mac's student, have everything be on the table. It becomes a very seamless transformation between different scalar issues, whether it's furniture, interior, and as it gets embedded into architecture, and then the architecture becomes a larger scale into an urban environment. So I definitely think that as designers, we all ought to kind of think in that manner in order to have a more continuous spatial experience.
Any other students who'd like to give us your thoughts or reflections? No volunteers. Could I just finish by seeing if Mari, if you have any thoughts to share with us. I know you've gone back there and hiding behind everybody there, but any of your thoughts just to kind of leave us with as we ponder all your contributions would be.
Yes. I thank you. I'm not really hiding. I just thought I would remove myself as a treat to myself from the consciousness of a panelist and sort of learn something since I am here. But what I would say is we all have a lot of baggage. We are highly educated. We have belief systems, value systems, and I think that a program in an educational institution should include a questioning, not necessarily an argument with, but a questioning, a safe place to question your value systems. You put on the screen a Mies van der Rohe chair and you go, is this a good chair? So many institutions say this is good taste, this is good design, Dieter has the 10 Commandments. I would say, let's talk about that. Because I come from 20 years of hard labor on the floor with clients that go, will that glass break if I drop it? And I go, yes, it will. And they go, that's a bad glass. And I started to think about things like fragility. Like, where can I afford vulnerability in my life? I mean, just coming from those kinds of questions, I can't afford it in most areas, but I can. The engagement with a fragile glass means I have to modify my behavior and become a more graceful human being. So that glass is a vehicle for me to achieve grace. So that's a good glass. And I think that that's basically it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, for your incredible contribution. You've given us a lot. Mari, thank you very much for your comments now. I think one of the values of what you are saying, which goes back to the discussion of the haptic and the tactile, and you know, I think one of the kind of interesting documentaries made a long time ago was the one that was about Yamamoto, which was this cities and clothes, or a note on cities and clothes. And you understand exactly what you're talking about with glass, because there is something about the idea of design and its relationship to the immediacy of the thing, of the fabric, its relationship to the body, and the way in which Yamamoto was able to actually respond and try and see how those things work. I think what's been really incredible with the studio that we saw in the video is precisely the manner of touching, handling, and working, for example, with the furniture, with the chairs, that the students really developed an intimate relationship with those objects. I think we've seen over the last few years there's an incredible hunger in the school for us not just to deal with projects intellectually, which is really at the core of what we are doing, but also to deal with them physically, viscerally. And I think that dimension is something that's very important. And studios like Max deal with that. There are other studios actually that have dealt. We had the studio of Achim Mengiz. There's work that Georges Lejeune does. There are lots of other studios that deal with this idea of the relationship to the making, to the fabrication. And I think that is very much part of this sense of the material that you're talking about. And I'm sure that that's something that we have to think more carefully, how we bring more of that thought in a way into the school. But there's a lot to think about. Thanks again to Jonathan and Chantal, and to all our presenters, moderators, panelists, and to all of you for staying here until 8:20 on a Friday night. It's really pretty amazing. You get to have a drink now if you want. Thank you very much.